Okay, this video is going to be something a little bit different. Uh, I've been seeing like these like let's plays. Like people, what they'll do is they'll play a game and they'll have some narration for it. And most of them are really awful. Most people are really irritating. Like you don't want to hear them talk. And I think that's kind of how my voice is. My voice is really kind of irritating to a lot of people. I don't like the sound of my own voice. Um, but I was thinking, you know what? I talk about stuff anyway. I talk about economics and political economy mainly. And so I talk about stuff. But I was thinking, well, you know what? If I'm going to talk about stuff, why not just record a video game and talk over the video game? So I said, okay, so that'll be like my let's play thing. Because looking at some other let's players, I don't know what you call them, thinking generally that there's really only two, and maybe one there's really only two really good let's players in my opinion. That's Rao Cow, who may be a communist, I don't know. That's disconcerting. And Saron Lionheart. Saron Lionheart, because he can make his voice funny, and he just he's entertaining. Saron Lionheart's entertaining, and Rao Cow just has a naturally funny sounding voice, and yeah, they're both good. There's another guy, Proton John something. He is not irritating. That's what I can say for him, which is better than most, better than almost all the other video game players. He's not irritating. I might be irritating. I might not even reach that. So, what do I want to talk about? This game. This game is a great game that I'm playing. I'm not really talking much about the game. Not doing a very good job so far. This game is called Allied General, but it's part of the generally referred to as part of the Panzer General series, because there was a game called Panzer General. Then Allied General was just an expansion pack off of this, and this is a scenario from Allied General. And in Panzer General, you can play a whole bunch of different scenarios as either the Soviets, the U.S., British, Italians, lots of scenarios with various different countries. Or you could play a campaign as the Germans. In Allied General, you could play a whole bunch of scenarios, or you could play campaigns as the Russians or the British. That's why it was called Allied General, because you were the Allies, whereas Italy and Germany were not allies, or what? I don't know. So yes, that's what that is, and I'm playing the scenario, if you couldn't already tell, is a Korsun. And this is from, you could tell, January 1944. For people who know the history at this time, kind of know what period of the war this was in. And in this, I'm trying to keep the Russians from taking Korsun and from taking a bunch of other towns that would, I guess, is supposed to represent Korsun being cut off. So don't want them to pocket Korsun. You want to keep that little thing. I don't know why. I don't know what's so strategic about it. But we do. And that's the point, and that's what I'm trying to defend. I'm trying to, and of course, defending that little pocket area involves defending it from a whole bunch of other areas that could cut it off. So that's why the fight is so wide-ranging, and it's kind of a mess. But it's fun. This is a fun little scenario. I like this scenario. It's one of my favorites. And that's that. I play as the Germans. They have the coolest looking equipment. They have the coolest looking uniforms. They have the coolest looking planes. And they just have the cool. They're the coolest. And because of that, in order to avoid the cognitive dissonance, I pretend that when I'm playing as them, there was no Holocaust or political prison camps or, well, Well, maybe political prison camps for communists, for like hardcore communists. I wouldn't have any dissonance for that. Because I know that they would throw me in the camps if they had power. Um, so as you can tell, I kind of modded the graphics a little bit. I'm not fighting against the Soviet Union here. Clearly, I'm fighting against the armies of the United States Democrat Party. Here, that should be pretty. It's my little editing here. You can change the graphics a little bit. That's all I really cared to do. I didn't care to change the unit icons very much. It's somewhat editable, this game. Oh, I'm not playing the original DOS version. I'm playing a remake called Panzer General Forever. And it's a great little remake. I highly recommend it. Okay. I went to the Foundation of Economic Education website, and there was a presentation by Brian Kaplan. And the title of this presentation was, I forget the title. It was like Libertarians in Public Opinion, or Public Opinion for Libertarians, or something like that. And it was a pretty depressing talk. And in it, he forewarned that it was going to be an extremely depressing talk. And the basic message of the talk was that Americans are not libertarians at all. Not even close. And generally what he found was that if you ask people abstractly if they would like to cut government spending, they'll all say yes. Yes, government needs to be cut. It's getting too big. It needs to be cut. But then we ask them what specifically to cut. Okay, so you want to cut income security? No. You want to cut schools? No. You want to cut the military? No. A few more support cutting the military, but generally no. They don't support cutting the military. So they want to cut government spending, but they don't want to cut anything. Is the thing. So yeah. So they're not really libertarians. He also made the argument that Americans generally support the Patriot Act, and are protectionists, are anti-free trade. Now, one point he made that I thought was interesting was that the policies are actually more sane than the public opinion. That he was saying that some anti-democratic forces in the U.S. government was actually making the policies less bad. Because, like, Brian Kaplan, he said that when he was analyzing these policies, his question was, how can the government impose policies that are this bad? Like the minimum wage, all these regulations that are clearly corporatist crap, and, well, the whole libertarian deal. And that was the question he asked at first. But then when he started studying public opinion, he asked a different question. And that question was, how are the policies not way worse than they are? Saying that public opinion, like if you think that the government's policies are bad, public opinion is way worse than the policies that are being imposed. And he was making the argument that it appears as if some special interests are actually working, on the size, on the good guys, on the good guys' side. That the anti-democratic forces may actually be good, be good for liberty. I had another idea. I forgot what I was going to say. So, yes, that's that. Oh, and another interesting fact what he brought up was that a majority of people in Sweden, when asked, they'll say that they want, when asked if they think government should be cut, they'll say yes. So that should put that statistic as being kind of suspect. Like when people say, yes, I want government to be cut, in the abstract, okay, whatever, but when you actually get down to cutting things, it doesn't really happen. And the fact that these uber statist European states say that they want things to be cut, but obviously, Sweden like never cuts anything. Obviously, that puts that statistic in a dim light. But one thing that I found, well, that he presented, that really made me kind of cringe, or like it kind of surprised me, was a question that basically asked, should racially offensive statements be made illegal? And according to Kaplan, the majority of Americans say yes, that racist statements should be banned. You should not be allowed to say racist things. And I was shocked at this. Like, I could kind of understand Americans saying, no, I don't think racist statements should be banned. That's free speech. And if you say racist things, I should also have the right to call you something, something, something. Okay. Like, that's what I figured most Americans would say. And then I figured that, well, when you actually gave an example, probably gave some, if you gave some caricature, like, well, what do you think about if someone said that all black people should be killed? Or more realistically, all white people should be killed. Right. I could see Americans saying, oh no, that should be banned. Now, that's not what they did, though. It was in the abstract. Like I can understand Americans like being, say that they're principally for free speech, but then when you actually put it to them, put a real test of free speech, they say no. I guess I'm not for free speech. But no, like these were people's like a principle. Like they was asking, in principle, are you for free speech? And they say no. And that surprised me. That kind of worried me. And when I heard that, that's when I started thinking about the medieval mind. I started thinking about people in the Middle Ages, what they believed. And they believed a lot of crazy things. One example that I think kind of illustrates, like they had, what was it? Lungwort, whatever. They had like this kind of leaf thing that was shaped like a lung. Okay, it was shaped like a lung. And so they thought, because it was shaped like a lung, they thought if you ground it up and ingested it, it would cure respiratory problems. Right? Like that's the level of thought that was had. And this is like what smart people thought back then. Or like bloodletting. Right? Or divine right of kings. Like the king rules over you. Why? Because God said so. God said the king has the right to all this land. All the horrible things he's doing to you, that's what God wants. Well, okay, if God says so. No. Obviously, the peasants weren't quite that browbeaten, but that was a basic argument. And you even had things like the dog heads. It was common knowledge at the time that in some far-off land there were humans, basically people with human bodies but dog heads. And they were the dog heads. And there was a great theological debate at the time talking about whether or not the dog heads had souls. Because do the dog heads have souls? Because if they have souls, then we need to proselytize to them. We need to evangelize and show them the good news about Jesus and all that stuff, and make them Christians, so that their souls can be saved. That was and there was a debate at the time, and eventually they came to the conclusion that yes, dog heads, from what accounts they had of the dog heads appeared to be like humans, right? They were farming, they took care of animals and stuff, and so it was assumed that yes, okay, they are like humans, so they do have souls. So it was assumed that the dogheads did have souls, and if they ever came into contact with the dogheads, they would in fact try to proselytize to them. That was no joke. That was a serious debate in the highest level of the theology at the time. And you had these churches saying these crazy things, But why were they believed? Well, they had all the trappings of authority. They had the big buildings, all the big buildings, all the beautiful stuff. All the literate, I mean, almost all the literate people were connected to the church in one way or another, in the monasteries or bishops or whatever. They had big buildings. They were literate. They were the smart people. They were the most worldly. They were the most well traveled. And they had hierarchies. They had rituals. Like they were like a state. Kind of like universities are kind of like states. Universities, well, all the smart people are there, right? All the smart people in these big buildings. They're old as well. They have tradition. They have hierarchies. They have lots of officialness. And if you think about a university, it's kind of like what's really the point of a university? I mean, is if you want to, like, let me ask you this, like, if you want to learn something, do you go, I want to learn something, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to find a guy who understands that topic and try to get, like, live lectures from him. I'm not going to get video lectures that I can download and listen to anytime. And video lectures that can be really highly produced because it's only one time. It's a one-time thing. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to try to get a live seat to listen to a guy talk about a certain topic that I want to learn about. And I want to pay this guy like, I don't know, whatever it is a major university, like $2,000 for a semester of this. I don't know what it is, like 500 a credit. You take a 4-credit class, it's like $2,000. So I mean, does that make any sense at all? Like I don't see any sanity in this. I don't see how people can think that this has anything to do that like a university system has anything to do with learning. Because if it was about learning, then there's so many more efficient ways that you can do it. Right? Instead of having to relocate and pay a whole bunch of money for these buildings and for all the crap about it, like the sports teams, the fraternities, and all this stuff, like it's not about like. I mean, obviously there are teaching you things there while you're there, but if the focus was learning, then first of all, it would be much shorter and much more intensive. Like, you wouldn't have all these activities. It'd be like, no, you're in college, you're studying, that's what you're doing. You're studying 8 hours a day, and that's that. You can burn through a degree in 2 years. So, or maybe even 1 year, or maybe 1.5 years, depending. And they wouldn't have all this, core curriculum stuff. And just the name of it. You have the professors. Like they are professing the truth to you. They know, and they are professing to you. Now I can kind of understand like the hard sciences, where people who are good at the hard sciences, like the thing about this is the hard sciences is that they're verifiable and falsifiable. Like the bridge, either it stands or it doesn't. Either the cracking tower separates the oil more efficiently than another one, or it doesn't. There's a degree of objectivity there, so I can understand, an experienced engineer teaching other engineers the correct mode of engineering, because that's all highly referenced to reality. But the thing is, like sociology or the humanities generally, like there's no. It lacks that sense of objectivity. So to say that these people should profess to you is it's assuming, and it's a kind of an inappropriate. It's an inappropriate way, or it's an inappropriate way to learn that subject. It may be an appropriate way for the hard sciences, because there really is the correct way and there really is the wrong way to build a bridge. Okay, and so that kind of hierarchical, this is it, these are the formulas, this is how it is done. That makes sense for that kind of stuff. It doesn't make sense for for like critical race theory or anything like that. Anyway, I'm going off on kind of a tangent. So we look at people in the Middle Ages as being very much a product of their times, their belief. They were very much influenced by the cultural and ideological norms of that time. You know, you could tell people back then that you saw a dragon or you saw a giant, and my guess is they're very likely to believe you. Or if they didn't believe you, it wouldn't be because they think that giants or dragons don't exist. It would be because they question whether or not you actually met one. You know, kind of like if you went up to them and said that you saw the dog heads. You know, we understand that dog heads exist in far off lands, but we don't really believe that you actually met them. What proof do you have that you actually met them? That's what they would be questioning on. And we look at this as them being a product of their times. And, you know, we can go even further back to like the classical period, you know, them worshiping the pantheon and, you know, and having child sacrifice. You know, like the kingdom of Carthage having child sacrifices, and the mother being ritual. I forget what it was. Like the mother was not supposed to cry or something, and if the mother cried, then like they would whip the mother. Like if the mother cried during the sacrifice of one of her children, the mother would be whipped for weakness or something. It was, yeah, pretty nasty stuff. But that was the norm of the time. Believed all sorts of crazy stuff at the time. But we, at this point in history, we are not the product of some crazy ideas. Like we are not, like we are modern, so to speak. We are not just a point in history, kind of like medieval man was a point in history. Like medieval man, he's a product of his environment. He's a point in history. We are modern. We are not a product of our history. We are really seeking the truth. Right? That's what people today. But that's, you know, it sounds stupid when you actually say it. But that's what I think most people think. You know, and I think that I think this is the age of democracy. And that, you know, in 200 or 300 years, people are going to be looking back, and they're going to be thinking, "Wow, democracy. That was nuts." And just the idea, just think about democracy, the way to come to the best things, or the best way to decide what should be done is to have a vote. and not only like is there the problem of, you know, there being no wisdom in the masses, but you also have like voting wars. You have rational ignorance, you know, because like your vote doesn't, like in a large population, your vote doesn't matter very much. It's irrational for you to invest much time in actually learning about politics, and so democracy depends on a informed public, but it's not rational to be informed because it's not worth most people's time. So it basically depends on people being irrational. And democracy depends on people being irrational to work. Of course, most people vote. Why? Because they're pressured into voting. Now, voting doesn't take much effort. You just go down to the polling place and do the voting thing. So that doesn't take much effort. What does take effort is actually learning the truth about positions. Most people, very few people actually do that. You got a lot of people who are ideologues, and they just, you know, repeat whatever team they're on. They repeat that line very adamantly for some emotional satisfaction, but very few actually research and actually try to find economic truth and vote accordingly. And, you know, a lot of people who do try to find economic truth, a lot of them don't even vote because they recognize that their vote doesn't matter at all. So, and democracy, I think, is going to be remembered kind of like how we see communism. Because, of course, in democracy, communism is implied. So it's like, because if they can vote on things, like here's the thing, like if you actually own your property, then it's not like negotiable. If you actually own it, a group of people can't just vote to take it from you. Okay, the fact that people can vote to take it from you, and ultimately the state could vote to take anything it wants from you. A constitutional amendment or something could allow for that, but that's basically just another form of voting. Okay, and so basically through voting, the state could take anything it wants from you theoretically, and that's important. Okay, and so ultimately, that means that the state ultimately owns everything. And of course, what is the state? Well, the state in democracy is controlled by the mob, and so in an indirect sense, it's like the mob owns everything in a giant commune. Right? So all property is collectively owned, and I hope I don't have to get into the problems of that, of collective ownership with populations beyond like the tribal level. I mean, humans evolved in tribes, and tribes are highly collectivistic. But the thing is, ants also live in ant colonies, and they overcome free rider problems and collective action problems, and have different individual members of the colony sacrificing themselves so the colony can live and stuff like that. So ants do that, but that's because they're programmed to do that. They're programmed to be altruistic in a limited sense, altruistic to the colony. Similarly, humans can survive in small communes with small groups because that's how humans are. Kind of like ants, only with a much smaller colony. Actually larger in terms of physical size, but smaller in terms of number of members. But when you try to apply that to a much larger scale, basically there's about 200 people you can actually perceive as being people. And that's about the upper limit for the size of a tribe. Anything, and of course it's not like, you're at 200, then 201, like, okay, now you, that's too big and it's going to fail. I mean, there's obviously some gray area and some transition, but say you get up to like 10,000, like communism will definitely not work in a group of 10,000. 10,000 normal people. Maybe you could get some, like, round up 10,000 Marxist Leninist ideologues, and they might try to make it work. They might work even though that everything that they produced has very little benefit for them, because it's all going to some collective pot, and so any increase in their productivity, like, is going to be divided by 10,000. Like, if they work twice as hard, that extra effort that goes back to them is just going to be divided by 10,000. So they see very little of their extra work. But if they're like communist ideologues, they may work harder just to prove communism or something, even though it wouldn't work for people who aren't communist ideologues. Maybe. Although maybe that not even that would work. What am I talking about? I'm kind of rambling while I'm playing a game here. The democratic mind. Like, when we talk about the medieval mind right now, I think in the future they're going to be talking about the democratic mind. What are the strange characteristics of the democratic mind that are different from other periods in history? Well, the democratic mind has a strange belief in group equality. And it's this weird split is what it is. Like, obviously there's innate individual differences in terms of intelligence. And this is really what we're talking There's innate differences between people in terms of intelligence. Okay, but like they go from this, like, okay, individual differences, that's fine, but group differences, no way. Like it's weird. Like if we take a look at all the races of man, or whatever non-race word you want to use to call the races, you have black people, Asian people, Samoan people. Samoan people are way bigger; they're huge. Black people are faster. Dark, different skin colors, different facial structure, bone structure. You have all these differences between all the races of man. But yet, and you even have different like skull capacity size. You have different average brain size, right? Does this mean that bigger is more intelligent? No, because obviously dolphins have bigger brains than humans, and elephants have bigger brains than humans. Um, Whales have bigger brains than humans. So, and obviously we would say that humans are smarter than those mammals. But on the other hand, you do see bigger brains tend to be more quote intelligent by our best perception, because obviously whales, dolphins, and elephants are definitely some of the smartest animals on the planet. And animals with smaller brains tend to be not as smart, according to our best perception of intelligence. So, obviously, across species, bigger brains do tend to be more intelligent, even if it's not completely linear. Like that tendency definitely is true, but like why would we assume that the different groups of men are the same? Like especially when the brain sizes are different among the different groups. Now, I mean, you may say that like for example, like black people on average have smaller brains. You may say, well, black people on average have smaller brains, and that makes them smarter because the neurons are more densely packed, more close together. Their brains run more efficient. Therefore, that's a good theory why black people are smarter than white people. I could understand that. Okay, and I would respect that theory much, much, much more than the idea that they all ended up being the same. Now, the idea that they all ended up being the same is just childish. Like, why would that happen? That's so dumb. They're not the same in any other aspect. Why would they be the same in terms of brain function, brain ability, or brain capacity in any way? But of course, this is not something that is ever analyzed. This is just one of those instantiated truths that people are taught when they're really young, or they pick it up when they're really young, and that's why they believe it. It's not something reasoned to. Kind of like God and kind of like religion. Now, I don't want to give the impression that I think religion's really important, because I don't. The reason I bring up religion a lot is because it's something that's obviously not true, and that's why I just use it as a foil. I use it like to compare other things too, because it's so obviously like false that that's the only reason I talk about it. It's not because I think Christianity is a grave threat or anything, because it's not. But like, I'm not a militant atheist. In fact, my opinion, I think theists are better than atheists. I would, I would support. I'm a libertarian, so I oppose the state, but I would take some glee in seeing schools forcing people to pray, just so I could see all these, YouTube atheist shitheads being forced to pray. I would take some pleasure out of that. That's kind of where I am. Like, I hate these people, and I don't hate Christians. I'm just making a lot of analogies to religion, just because it's like obviously wrong. and and people who really possess the democratic mind tend to fall for authorities, and in the U.S. I believe that there are way more authorities than there were in the Middle Ages. In the Middle Ages, you had basically the church and the hierarchy and the kings that the church justified. So there weren't that many authorities. There's a lot more authorities today. For example, you have like the head of the American Heart Association, the Surgeon General, the Attorney General, judges, circuit court, this court, that court judges, politicians. Although I don't think politicians are seen as authority figures very much anymore. You have all the professors at the state university. You have all the experts. Only experts telling you all the correct stuff. And of course, experts fail all the time, right? And a great example of this would be the lipid hypothesis, the lipid hypothesis for heart disease. The idea that it's the intake of dietary fats that cause plaque formation in the artery walls, causing you to get heart disease or heart attacks and all that stuff. And when I was listening to Gary Taubes and listening to his debates with other people, and I didn't read his book. I would say I read through his book, kind of burned through it. Wasn't really listening very closely, just kind of read it and got through it. His book, Good Calories, Bad Calories. But really, like you just think about it, humans, for a long period of time, humans have been eating. There are periods of time where humans would eat almost exclusively meat. Like they wouldn't eat a whole lot of starches. They eat hardly any starches. They eat a few nuts, and they would eat some fruit. Okay, and they wouldn't eat much fruit. Like all the fruit that we eat today has been selectively bred to be way bigger than fruit was back then. Way nicer than fruit was back then. And so we didn't evolve to eat like these high carbohydrate diets. And of course, once man started eating these high carbohydrate diets, started getting heart disease. It was known as a disease of civilization. Heart disease didn't really exist before civilization. Then you had civilization, then man started getting heart disease. Right? And what I see is well, look, like lions eat meat all the time, and they eat tons of saturated fat. In fact, lions will often eat the fattiest parts of the meat and leave the lean parts of the meat to the vultures and the hyenas. And they don't get heart disease. So, and I'm thinking, well, and there are humans for a long period of time. Cavemen, they never got heart disease. They show no evidence of getting heart disease, and they would eat diets consisting primarily of meat, and they'd eat the fat. So, and I heard of this, and I heard Gary Taubes' presentations and skimmed through his book basically, and I think I'll link to that. I'll link to a few of his presentations. And so then I tried his diet. I don't know if it's any different from the Atkins diet. But what I was doing is I was eating, high protein, and I wasn't concerned about saturated fat. I also wasn't really concerned about calories that much. Because what will happen is that if you reduce your caloric intake, like what your body will do is your body will like lower the metabolism, and like what is found in animals is that if you reduce the amount of food that you give to them, well, they'll lower their metabolism, and if you reduce their food, and they may still continue to lose weight even though they've reduced their metabolism, and then when you start feeding them again, then they'll gain the weight back to their quote-unquote normal weight. And why would we expect anything different in humans? And that's one of the reasons why diet doesn't really work very, very well, and why it requires you to be constant work in order to maintain some superstar figure. And so I started going on this diet, and I got a little bit chunky. You know, I was up to about 15% body fat, and that's pretty high for me, 15%. And I started just eating. You know, I was eating. You know, I was eating like fatty beef jerky and stuff. You know, I was eating some a lot of fat, but I was eating. You know, I wasn't eating that much, and I didn't feel hungry at all. And I would go on these 10-mile walks, and I lost a ton of weight. And I got on my little magic body fat percentage calculator, and I didn't lose like any muscle, and it was all fat. It was great. And it was the easiest weight loss that I'd ever done. And I had done wrestling before, and I would lose weight on wrestling, and it was much harder than this. And I realized, well, it was because I was wrestling. I was eating, you know, carbohydrates while I was trying to cut weight. And apparently, what happens when you eat a bunch of carbohydrates, that results in insulin secretion. Because apparently, like, you can only, in your bloodstream, the typical person only has about 1 teaspoon of sugar throughout their entire bloodstream at any given time. So if you eat like a slice of bread, that has more carbohydrates than a teaspoon of sugar. And so when you eat that slice of bread, that's not all going to be going... you can't put all that in your bloodstream or else you'll die. So what insulin does is it shoves that sugar into either cells that could use it or into the fat. And if you eat a whole bunch of carbohydrates, it's just going to be shoving that straight into the fat. Straight into fat. It's a bit more complicated than that. But that's basically what happens. Carbohydrates end up as fat. Carbohydrates are also known to produce the highly dense cholesterol, or the highly dense, carbohydrates are most associated with the quote-unquote bad cholesterol. I'm not talking about the low-density lipoproteins, the high-density lipoproteins. There's like something different. I'd recommend watching a movie called Fathead, where he talks about this stuff. And I'm kind of falling asleep while I'm doing this game and talking about things, so I'm not doing very well. I'm also not doing very well in this game. I'm taking a lot more casualties than I normally do. But I think they're gonna be the commies are punching themselves out here. So we'll see. We will see. Don't know what else to talk about here. I'm fighting a battle, and I hope I'll win. That's really all I have to say here. World War II. Boom. Use some words that people say a lot. Eastern Front. Eastern Front. This is the Eastern Front. Yes. Wehrmacht. Blitzkrieg. Schwerpunkt. Heinz Guderian. Erich von Manstein. Zhukov, Konev, Timoshenko. Those are the only Russian generals I know. Zhukov, Konev, and Timoshenko. I don't know that many German generals either, really. Let me name the German generals I know. I know Manstein, Guderian, Rommel, of course. Von Rundstedt. Who else do I know? Ludwig Beck. I have no idea. Why do I know of Ludwig Beck? I don't know. But I know of Ludwig Beck. Who else? Von Lieb, von Bach, Heinrichi, Blomberg. There's a guy in Blomberg. He's a field marshal. Model. Model, yeah. He was an odd character. He was a fanatic. He led the German army in the Ruhr, and they got pocketed, and he killed himself as opposed to surrendering. He was a fanatic. He was a real fanatical Nazi. There were a lot of them. A lot of fanatical Nazis. I got a comment from some guy who was talking about how it was funny. He was talking. I was talking about how democracy sucks and blows, and he was saying that, oh yeah, well there are people revolting for democracy in these other countries around the world. They're fighting and dying for democracy. So sorry if I take the people who are fighting and dying for democracy more seriously than I do your analysis. And I was thinking, okay, well, Model, like, he fought and he died for National Socialism. Okay, and if we look this up, you'd find that there are a lot of fanatics there. There were people after Germany had already surrendered. They were fighting in the hills up there in Austria and Bavaria. You know, they were fighting till the end. You know, they were fanatics. There were lots of Nazi fanatics. Does that mean they were right? That's a real weird argument. And like the Christians, they would rather be eaten by the lions than forsake their faith. And that impressed a lot of people. Like, well, okay, that means they're right, that they're really fanatical about their beliefs. That must mean there's something to this Christianity thing. Well, obviously there is something to anything that can get people to sacrifice their lives for it, and that's not always it's not always good. So yeah, there clearly was something to that Christianity thing. Germans and Russians. I was thinking it would be very interesting if in 1914, if Germany didn't invade Belgium. Because what happened was that the British public was generally anti-war. But there are some politicians that had made like a little promise to France that if Germany attacked France, that Britain would intervene and defend France. But the British public was not interested in joining the war. So what happened was Germany invaded Belgium, right? Because the idea was that they were going to go through Belgium, because apparently that was an easier route to get to France than to go right up the middle, or up through the whatever it is, the Alsace-Lorraine region. And so Germany invaded Belgium. And the British politicians used this as an excuse to go to war. It's like, oh, look, Belgium wasn't a part of any alliance system. Like France was a part of an alliance with Russia, was part of an alliance with Serbia. And so, you know, it could be understood at the time why Germany would go to war with France. But Belgium wasn't a part of any alliance system. So, you know, Germany was just unprovoked aggression. And so Britain, you know, intervened because Germany invaded Belgium. And there was a point when the Germans had completely broken through all the French lines, and it was just the British who stood between the Germans and Paris. It was the British who actually stopped the German advance from completely breaking out because there was like nothing between some German army and Paris except the British. So if Germany hadn't invaded Belgium, well, we don't know. If Germany hadn't invaded Belgium, France may not have even declared war on Germany. Because what ended up happening was Germany declared war on France because France was mobilizing their army, and the German military staff was thinking, well, is France going to... Because France was allied to Russia, and Germany was at war with Russia, but Russia had not yet declared war on Germany, and so the German general staff was like, well, what are they doing? Are they going to go to war with us or not? So they decided to attack first, but they went through Belgium, and that resulted in Britain intervening. But what if Germany never did declare war on France and never did attack Belgium? Well, France may have eventually declared war on Germany, but maybe. But even then, Germany was able to defeat Russia. Germany was able to defeat Russia while fighting a war against France, Britain, and then eventually the U.S. So I think it's pretty safe to say that Germany could have defeated Russia if they were just fighting war against France. Now just imagine that. Just imagine Germany going to war with Russia, defeating Russia, and then like occupying Russia, and then Russia becoming like the empire, and then France, and then the war with France just ending with the status quo. Like, imagine how much better off Russia would be today. How much different it would be. You know, I wonder if there would have been a program of like Germanification of Russia, or like a mass breeding population of the German population, like trying to double the German population within one generation, and then mass migration of Germans into Russian territory, and then scrambling ethnicities and scrambling communities, basically breaking up communities and putting them all across the country, so that there's no solid community structure that people have. And so basically, like when you scramble people's communities or rip them away from their communities, what they're going to do is they're going to try to cling on to whatever is solid around them. Okay? And so if you break up their communities and send them to a new area where they don't know anyone, and then provide them like, offer them German citizenship, and if they can become a German citizen, then they can join certain clubs and have access to certain employment services or all this stuff if they pledge loyalty to Germany or something like that. I could really see a successful cultural conquest of Russia. I mean, obviously the military conquest, that's not that difficult, but I can see a successful cultural conquest if they engage in a policy of scrambling ethnicities and mass, movements of people all around to break up the community fiber, so to speak, and then of course, because Germany was much more of a free market than Russia. Obviously, Russia was like feudalism, and so you'd have basically an industrial revolution in Russia. All these German industries would be investing in Russia like crazy, or in the Russian territories like crazy, and you'd have like a capitalist industrial revolution like you had in Britain and France and Germany, in Russia, and so it would be a perfect storm of assimilation, because you'd scramble the ethnicities, they'd be in a new area, and there would be a new economy, right, and a new standard of living. Basically, like the entire old ways, which was of crappy subsistence farming, had all withered away, and people had these higher paying factory jobs. Now, of course, by modern standards, it was absolutely wretched. But by those standards, it was a great improvement in standard of living. These higher paying factory jobs, industrial agriculture, more productive agriculture. So, and just imagine that. Just imagine, like, say, because the Russian population, or the population of the Soviet Union at the beginning of World War II was about 160 million, and the population of Germany was about well, if you include all the territories and Austria, the population of Germany was about 75 million. Um, so yeah, the Soviet Union was only about a little more than twice as many people as Germany. Not, you know, if you look at the landmass, you may think, well, that they're way bigger than that, but they're really not. And of course, at around 1914, I know Germany's population was about 60 million. And so what was Russia, the population of the Russian Empire? My guess is it was probably about 130 million, maybe? So if you think about that, you think about, okay, so Germany conquers Russia, has a massive scrambling program of the ethnicities, has a massive investment program, and has a massive breeding program in Germany to double the German population, and then mass settle Russia with Germans. So in about 20 to 30 years time, there are 60 million ethnic Germans living in Russia, and about 140 or maybe let's say about 150 million ethnic Russians living in Russia. But all these ethnic Russians have been scrambled. There's been a great big program to get them to pledge their allegiance to the German state. You put their kids in schools where they are required to learn German, and they are required to learn some history that serves the German state. And I think the history would be like some, you'd find some, you'd cook up some evidence for like Germany and Russia being like historically the same, or you'd find some linguists like make some linguistic argument that Russian and German have like the same root something something. And so they're both really like basically like two lost brothers that are finally meeting and finally realizing that they're the same people or something like that. Just make up some bullshit like that. Right? And as long as you can control the school system and control the media, you can get people to think that. You can get people to think that Russians and Germans are like the same people. Right? And I can imagine like by around 1940, if all went according to plan, Russia and Germany would be like one nation. It wouldn't be like Germany occupying Russia and then having to expend resources to control this area and then maybe being able to get some raw materials from their occupation. No, it would be like they were all German Russians, Jerussians. They were all Prussians, we'll say. And all being Prussians, they would all be national. It wouldn't be an occupation. So if the Germans ever went to war with France or whatever, they could count on just as much manpower from the quote-unquote Russian population as from the German population, because they've all been brainwashed into thinking that they're the same people. And that would be like that would have been quite an amazing state there. Just imagine that one state. And then of course what would have happened? Well, the Central Powers would have won the war, and Austria-Hungary would not have been broken up at the end of the Great War. But of course Austria-Hungary was eventually going to break up. So that would have led to a conflict. Right? I could envision if this happened, if this alternative history thing happened, Austria-Hungary would in fact break up, and it would be a mess. And somehow, some way, the breakup of the Austro-Hungarian Empire would result in some war. And that would be a war between this new Germany-Russia empire and France, Italy, and Britain. That would result in another world war between France, Italy, and Britain, and the Germany-Russia thing. and they would be fighting over the Balkans, basically the Austro-Hungarian Empire, the size of Hungary following the breakup, Serbia, the size of Serbia following the breakup, Bulgaria wanting to get territory from Serbia, Romania wanting to get territory from Hungary. Yeah. And all that probably would have resulted in some sort of war. So there would have eventually been a world war out of the unresolved situation in the Balkans. Another interesting thing that would have been nice about that, if Germany won World War One in the way I described, by conquering Russia and having a status quo peace with France and not going to war with Britain or the USA at all, is that, you know, that empire then of Germany, Russia, that would have been a constitutional monarchy, basically. You know, it would remain the German monarchy, but it would be huge and it would be incredibly prosperous. So it would be a very big, you know, sign. Look, you don't need democracy to have wealth. And so that would have been a great, huge counterexample of the democracy files or democrophiles or whatever, the democracy pushers. Now I think the prosperity of Germany prior to the end of World War One is evidence that monarchy can have fairly free markets and can be fairly prosperous. More prosperous than democracies, in fact. I think Germany's per capita standard of living was greater than that of France. Not greater than that of Britain, though. So, all right. I think that about wraps this up. Doesn't look like much as good is gonna. I think the Russians have just about punched themselves out here. Or excuse me, the Democrats, the U.S. Democrat Party has punched themselves out here. So I think I don't have much else to talk about, and this is about over. So, okay.